Alexander Stone's assistant burst into his office at 9:23 a.m. with news that would destroy everything. "Sir, she's here. The woman from the Peterson account. And she's asking questions." For 7 years, one rule had protected his billion-dollar empire: no office romances, no exceptions, no weakness. But when Isabella Chen walked into his building that morning, she carried a secret that would force him to choose between his company and the one thing he'd sworn never to risk again. What she knew about his past would change everything, and she had no idea she was about to become the most dangerous woman in his world. It's so great to have you here. If you're ready to dive into today's captivating story, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from around the world. I love connecting with viewers from everywhere. Speaking of which, I've got another fascinating story lined up for you tomorrow that I think you'll find just as compelling as today's tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. But enough about tomorrow. Let's jump into today's story. Isabella Chen straightened her blazer one final time, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric. The Sterling Industries tower stretched endlessly above her, all glass and steel and impossible dreams. 6 months of unemployment had led to this moment, a junior marketing position that could change everything, or destroy what little confidence she had left. "You belong here," she whispered to herself, the same mantra that had carried her through business school while working double shifts at the diner. The same words that had pulled her from the wreckage of her last relationship, when David had chosen his family's approval over their future. The elevator climbed steadily, each floor marking another step away from the girl who used to apologize for taking up space. The 32nd floor felt like ascending to another world, one where people wore confidence like expensive perfume and moved with the certainty of those who had never been told they weren't enough. Ms. Chen. A woman in a crisp white shirt appeared beside her. "I'm Jennifer, Mr. Stone's assistant. He's asked to meet you personally before you start." Isabella's heart stuttered. Alexander Stone didn't meet new junior employees. Everyone knew that. The man was legend, built Sterling Industries from nothing after his father's empire crumbled, never dated publicly, never showed weakness. The business magazines called him the Ice King of Wall Street. "Is that normal?" Isabella asked, following Jennifer through corridors lined with awards and photographs of handshakes with world leaders. "Mr. Stone likes to personally approve all new hires in creative departments," Jennifer replied smoothly, though something flickered in her eyes. "He's very particular about company culture." 40 floors up, Alexander Stone stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard he'd learned to master. Everything in its place. Every piece serving its purpose. Every rule protecting what mattered most. The intercom buzzed. "Sir, Ms. Chen is here for her introduction." He turned from the window, his reflection caught momentarily in the glass. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the invisible armor he'd worn so long it felt like skin. At 35, he'd built an empire by never letting emotion cloud judgment. The rules weren't just company policy, they were survival. No office romances. No personal involvement. No exceptions. The rule had been born from ashes, from watching his father's business partner seduce his mother, destroy their family, and leave Alexander to rebuild everything from ruins. Love was a liability he couldn't afford. "Send her in." The door opened, and Isabella Chen walked into his office like she was walking into her own execution. Nervous energy radiated from her small frame, but she held his gaze steady. Dark hair pulled back severely, minimal makeup, a suit that was well-tailored but not expensive. Everything about her screamed professional competence. So why did looking at her feel like stepping too close to a fire? "Ms. Chen." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, maintaining the distance that had served him well. "Welcome to Sterling Industries." "Thank you, Mr. Stone." Her voice was steadier than he'd expected, with a slight rasp that suggested she'd fought for every word. "I'm honored to be here." He opened her file, though he'd already memorized every detail. MBA from State, not Harvard. Worked her way through school. Previous employment at a small firm that had folded 6 months ago. No family connections, no trust fund, no safety net except her own determination. Everything he'd once been, before he'd learned to armor himself in wealth and reputation. "Your portfolio impressed the hiring committee," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Particularly the campaign you developed for Morrison Electronics. Creative but practical." A flush of pride colored her cheeks. "Thank you. I believe in finding the emotional truth of a brand, then building from there." Emotional truth. The phrase hung between them like a challenge. When was the last time he'd thought about emotional truth in anything? "At Sterling Industries, we maintain strict professional boundaries," he heard himself saying, the words automatic as breathing. "Our success depends on focus, dedication, and keeping personal feelings out of business," she finished quietly. "I understand completely." But something in her tone suggested she understood more than she was saying. As if she, too, had learned that walls were sometimes the only thing standing between you and destruction. He closed her file with a sharp snap. "You'll be working with the Peterson Hotels account. They're launching a new boutique chain, intimate, personal, designed to make guests feel like they're coming home." The irony wasn't lost on him. He was assigning her to sell the very thing he'd spent years avoiding. "I'll do my best, sir." "I'm sure you will." He stood, extending his hand in dismissal. "Welcome to the team, Ms. Chen." Her palm was soft against his, warm where his was always cold. The contact lasted exactly 3 seconds, professional, appropriate, meaningless. So why was his heart hammering like a teenager's? As she left his office, Alexander returned to the window, watching her reflection disappear in the glass. Somewhere in the space between her nervous smile and steady voice, something had shifted. A crack in the foundation he'd spent 7 years building. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to his assistant's number, then stopped. The smart move would be to reassign her to a different department. Remove the temptation before it became a problem. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to his desk, where Isabella Chen's personnel file lay open like a question he wasn't ready to answer. In the elevator descending to the 32nd floor, Isabella pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. 3 minutes in Alexander Stone's presence had left her feeling like she'd been struck by lightning, every nerve ending alive, every careful wall she'd built threatening to crumble. "This is just a job," she reminded herself. "Just a chance to start over." But as the elevator doors opened onto her new life, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be simple again. 3 weeks into her new position, Isabella had mastered the art of being invisible. She arrived early, left late, and kept her head down in meetings. The Peterson Hotels campaign was consuming her nights. She developed 3 different approaches, each more emotionally resonant than the last. But invisibility became impossible the moment Alexander Stone walked into the conference room at 9 a.m. sharp, his presence filling the space like electricity before a storm. Mr. Stone, Peterson's CEO, Marcus Webb, rose from his seat with obvious delight. "I wasn't expecting you personally." "The initial concepts intrigued me," Alexander replied, his eyes scanning the room before landing briefly on Isabella. "I wanted to see the presentation myself." Isabella's mouth went dry. Her carefully prepared slides suddenly felt inadequate, amateur. She built this campaign around emotional storytelling, the idea that luxury wasn't about thread count or marble bathrooms, but about the feeling of belonging somewhere. How could she explain that to a man who seemed to have surgically removed emotion from his life? Ms. Chen, Alexander's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. You're presenting today? Yes, sir. She stood, grateful her voice didn't betray the chaos in her chest. I've developed 3 concepts based on different emotional entry points. She clicked to her first slide, a black and white photograph of an elderly couple holding hands on a hotel balcony, city lights blurred behind them. Come home to love, she began, her confidence slowly building. This campaign focuses on hotels as spaces where relationships deepen, where anniversary trips happen, where couples remember why they chose each other. She watched Alexander's face for reaction, finding only that impassive mask he wore like armor. But his fingers, she noticed, had stilled on his pen. The second concept, rediscover yourself, targets business travelers who've lost touch with who they are beneath the suits and schedules. Her next slide showed a woman in a hotel robe, writing in a journal by a window. Sometimes we need to get away from our lives to remember what living feels like. Something flickered across Alexander's features, so quick she might have imagined it. And the third. Marcus Webb leaned forward, clearly captivated. Isabella hesitated. This concept felt too personal, too raw, but it was also the most honest. The courage to begin again. Her final slide showed an empty hotel room with a single suitcase, late afternoon light streaming through gauze curtains. For people starting over. After divorce, after loss, after the life they planned falls apart. The message is that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is book a room somewhere new and remember that endings can be beginnings. The silence stretched like a held breath. Marcus Webb was nodding enthusiastically, but Isabella's attention fixed on Alexander, whose jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. The third concept, Alexander said slowly, his voice carefully controlled, assumes our customers have failed at something. Not failed, Isabella found herself saying, her preparation forgotten. Survived. There's a difference between failing and having life happen to you. Is there? The question hung between them, loaded with something that had nothing to do with hotel marketing. Yes. She held his gaze, seeing something flicker behind those pale blue eyes, a recognition, a wound that matched her own. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've learned to start over. For a moment, the conference room fell away. It was just the two of them, 2 people who understood that survival sometimes meant building new lives from the wreckage of old ones. The emotional authenticity is powerful, Marcus Webb's voice broke the spell. I'd like to move forward with Concept 3. When can we see a full campaign? 2 weeks, Isabella managed, tearing her gaze away from Alexander. Excellent. Mr. Stone, your marketing team continues to impress. But Alexander wasn't looking at Marcus Webb. His attention remained fixed on Isabella with an intensity that made her skin burn. Ms. Chen, he said as the meeting concluded, a word. The room emptied until it was just the 2 of them, the silence thick with unspoken things. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, the city spread out below like a kingdom he'd conquered through sheer will. That campaign, he said without turning around. It's personal for you. Not a question. A statement that cut too close to truth. Good marketing always is, she replied carefully. Is it? He turned then, and the careful distance he maintained felt like a physical thing between them. Or are you selling your own story? The accusation should have stung. Instead, it felt like recognition, like he saw her in a way that no one had since David had walked away. Maybe, she admitted, the honesty surprising them both. But isn't that what makes it real? The best campaigns come from understanding what people actually need, not just what they think they want. And what do you think people actually need, Ms. Chen? The question was a trap, or an invitation. Isabella couldn't tell which. "Permission," she said quietly. "Permission to start over. Permission to believe they deserve better than what broke them. Permission to hope again, even when hope feels dangerous." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a crack in the mask so small she almost missed it. For just a moment, she glimpsed the man beneath the billionaire, the one who understood exactly what she meant. 2 weeks for the full campaign, he said, his voice rougher than before. "I want to see every detail." "Of course, Mr. Stone." But as she gathered her materials and headed for the door, his voice stopped her. "Isabella." The sound of her first name in his mouth was electric, intimate in a way that made her breath catch. "Sir. Good work today." It was nothing. A simple acknowledgement that any boss might give. But the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on her face, it felt like everything. As the door closed behind her, Isabella leaned against the hallway wall, her heart racing. She'd spent 6 months learning to live without the complication of wanting someone. 6 months building walls that David's betrayal had made necessary. But Alexander Stone had looked at her like he could see straight through every defense she'd carefully constructed. And God help her, part of her wanted him to. The next morning, Alexander's office felt like a fortress under siege. He'd arrived at 5 a.m., 2 hours earlier than usual, hoping the familiar ritual of work would restore his equilibrium. Instead, he found himself staring at Isabella's campaign notes, her handwriting flowing across the pages like water over stone. Permission to hope again, even when hope feels dangerous. He slammed the folder shut and reached for his phone. "Jennifer, I need Ms. Chen moved to the Morrison account. Effective immediately." "Sir." His assistant's voice carried a note of confusion. "But she's already deep into Peterson hotels. The presentation is." "I don't care. Move her." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Alexander wondered if the call had dropped. "Sir, may I ask why?" "Her work has been exceptional, and Mr. Peterson specifically requested her involvement after yesterday's meeting." Because she looked at him like she could see the scared 28-year-old who'd watched his world burn. Because her voice when she said permission to hope had sounded like a prayer he'd forgotten how to make. Because every corporate rule he'd built was crumbling the moment she walked into his world. "Business reasons," he said instead. "Handle it. I'll need to speak with department heads about reassignments." "Just do it, Jennifer." He ended the call and returned to the window, watching the city wake up in the distance. Control was about making hard choices before emotion could cloud judgment. His father had lost everything because he'd let his heart override his head. Alexander wouldn't make the same mistake. 32 floors below, Isabella was discovering that inspiration couldn't be scheduled. She'd been at her desk since 7, surrounded by coffee cups and crumpled sketches, trying to capture the essence of new beginnings. But every image she created, every tagline she wrote, led her back to the same place. Alexander Stone's office yesterday, the moment when his mask had slipped just enough to let her glimpse the man underneath. "Isabella." Her colleague Marcus approached with obvious reluctance. "Could I speak with you privately?" Her stomach dropped. In her experience, private conversations at work meant only one thing. They walked to an empty conference room, Marcus closing the door with the careful precision of someone delivering bad news. "I just got word from upstairs," he began. "You're being reassigned to the Morrison account." The words hit like a physical blow. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong? The Peterson presentation is in 10 days. I don't know the details. Orders came from the top. Mr. Stone specifically requested the change." Isabella sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Yesterday, Alexander had seemed impressed with her work. Engaged, even. The way he'd looked at her when she talked about permission to hope. Did he give a reason? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Business restructuring. That's all I was told. But Isabella knew better. She'd seen the way Alexander's composure had cracked when she talked about starting over. The way his voice had changed when he'd said her name. This wasn't about business restructuring. This was about a man running from something he couldn't control. By noon, Alexander had convinced himself he'd made the right choice. The Morrison account would keep Isabella busy and far from his daily operations. Problem solved. Equilibrium restored. Then Jennifer knocked on his door. "Sir? There's been a development with the Peterson account." "What kind of development?" Marcus Webb called. "He's threatening to pull the contract unless Ms. Chen remains on the project. Apparently, she made quite an impression yesterday." Alexander's carefully constructed morning crumbled. "He can't dictate our personnel decisions." "No, sir. But it's a $12 million account." And he was very specific. Either Ms. Chen continues as lead creative, or Peterson Hotels takes their business elsewhere. The corporate machinery Alexander had built to eliminate personal complications had just turned against him. Marcus Webb had unknowingly made it impossible to maintain the distance Alexander desperately needed. "Schedule a meeting," he said finally. "Ms. Chen and I need to discuss the project parameters." "When would you like?" "Now." Isabella walked into Alexander's office for the second time in 2 days, but everything felt different. The air crackled with tension, and Alexander stood behind his desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "Sit," he said without preamble. She remained standing. "Is this about the reassignment? Because I need to understand what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why am I being moved?" Alexander's jaw tightened. Business decisions don't require explanations to junior employees. The dismissal was designed to hurt, to push her away. Isabella recognized the tactic because she'd used it herself. Strike first, maintain distance, protect the tender places that couldn't survive another wound. "Of course," she said quietly. "I apologize for questioning your judgment." But instead of leaving, she stepped closer to his desk, her dark eyes blazing with something between anger and understanding. "You know what I think, Mr. Stone? I think you're scared." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. "Excuse me. Yesterday, when I talked about permission to start over, you looked like I'd reached inside your chest and touched something you'd forgotten was there. And now you're running. You're out of line." "Maybe. But I'm also right." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What happened to you? What made you so afraid of feeling anything real?" For a moment, Alexander's composure shattered completely. She saw it, the flash of pain, the memory of betrayal, the bone-deep exhaustion of carrying armor that had grown too heavy to bear. Then the mask slammed back into place. "The Peterson account stays with you," he said coldly. "But understand this, I don't tolerate personal complications in my business. Keep your insights about emotional truth confined to the campaign." "And if I can't?" The question challenged everything: his authority, his rules, his carefully maintained control. "Then you'll find yourself looking for employment elsewhere." Isabella nodded slowly, but her eyes never left his face. "Understood, Mr. Stone. Perfectly clear." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said without looking back, "some rules are worth breaking." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Alexander alone with a thundering of his own pulse and the terrible realization that his strongest defense had just been breached by a woman who saw right through him. And despite every rational thought screaming warnings, part of him was grateful she had. The Peterson Hotel's crisis hit at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, when Isabella's phone buzzed with an emergency text that would change everything. Peterson's board called emergency meeting. Vegas. Tomorrow 6 a.m. You're presenting. Jennifer. Isabella stared at the message, her blood turning to ice. A boardroom presentation to Peterson's full board was make-or-break territory, the kind of career moment that either launched you into the stratosphere or ended everything. Her phone rang immediately. Ms. Chen. Alexander's voice was crisp despite the late hour. I assume you got the message. Yes, sir. But I don't understand. Why the emergency meeting? Peterson's biggest competitor just launched a campaign that looks suspiciously similar to your emotional authenticity approach. Marcus Webb is questioning whether we leaked their strategy. Isabella's heart stopped. Are you saying they think I'm saying we have 12 hours to prove our campaign is superior and original, or we lose the account and potentially face legal action. The weight of it crashed over her. Her career, Alexander's reputation, millions of dollars, all hanging in the balance because someone had stolen her idea. I'll be ready, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. No. Alexander's response was immediate. We'll be ready. I'm flying out with you. We hung between them like a bridge over dangerous water. Sir, that's not necessary. I can handle. This isn't about what you can handle. This is about protecting Sterling Industries. The jet leaves at 4 a.m. The line went dead, leaving Isabella staring at her phone and wondering how her carefully compartmentalized life had just collapsed into chaos. The private jet was smaller than Isabella had imagined, all leather seats and polished with its spoke of wealth so casual it didn't need to announce itself. At 4:15 a.m., the cabin felt intimate in a way that made her hyper-aware of every breath. Alexander sat across from her, laptop open, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his angular features. He'd been working in silence since takeoff, the tension radiating from him like heat. The competitor's campaign, she said finally, unable to stand the quiet any longer. Can I see it? He turned his laptop toward her, and Isabella's stomach dropped. The imagery was different, but the emotional core was identical, healing, starting over, finding courage to begin again. Someone had taken her deepest insights and packaged them for Peterson's rival. It's not possible, she whispered. I didn't share this concept with anyone outside Sterling. Are you certain? The question carried an edge that made her look up sharply. Alexander was watching her with the same intensity from their first meeting, but now it felt like an interrogation. Are you asking if I'm certain, or if I'm honest? His silence was answer enough. Isabella closed the laptop with more force than necessary. I've never sold ideas to competitors. I've never leaked confidential information. And I've never given you a reason to doubt my integrity. Everyone has a price, Ms. Chen. The cynicism in his voice cut deep, but underneath it she heard something else. Exhaustion, disappointment, the weariness of someone who'd been betrayed too many times to trust easily. What's yours? She asked quietly. Excuse me. Your price. What would it take for someone to buy your loyalty? Your silence? Your betrayal of everything you've built? Alexander's hands stilled on his keyboard. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? You assume everyone can be bought because someone bought the person who mattered most to you. Someone took something precious and turned it into currency. The words hit their mark. Alexander's face went pale, his jaw tightening with barely contained emotion. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Isabella leaned forward, her voice gentle despite the tension crackling between them. What happened, Alexander? Who broke your trust so completely that you assume everyone else will do the same? For a moment, the corporate mask slipped entirely. Isabella saw the man underneath, wounded, guarded, carrying scars that had never properly healed. My business partner, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. My father's business partner. The man I'd called Uncle Richard since I was 5 years old. Isabella waited, sensing that pushing would only make him retreat. When my father died, Richard was supposed to help me save the company. Instead, he'd been systematically stealing from us for years. Clients, contracts, proprietary information. He took everything and sold it to our biggest competitor. Alexander's hands curled into fists. By the time I discovered the truth, we'd lost 90% of our business. I had to watch everything my father built get auctioned off piece by piece. How old were you? 28. The same age she'd been when David had chosen his family's money over their future. The same age when the world had taught them both that trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. I'm not Richard, Isabella said simply. Everyone says that. I'm not everyone. She reached across the small space between them, her fingers brushing his clenched fist. And you're not your father. The touch was electric, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. Two people who'd learned that survival meant building walls, suddenly finding someone who understood the cost of those defenses. Alexander's eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, everything else fell away. The plane, the crisis, the rules he'd built to protect himself, all of it dissolved in the space between breath and heartbeat. Then turbulence hit, jarring them apart. We should focus on the presentation, Alexander said, his voice rough with something that had nothing to do with the bumpy air. Of course. Isabella pulled her hand back, but the warmth of his skin lingered on her fingertips. They spent the remaining flight hours rebuilding her campaign from the ground up, their professional collaboration charged with new understanding. Alexander's insights were sharper than she'd expected, his creative instincts honed by years of building something from nothing. By the time they landed in Vegas, they had crafted something powerful, a presentation that was uniquely theirs, born from shared understanding of what it meant to rise from ashes. But as they gathered their materials and prepared to face the Peterson board, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that the real presentation wouldn't be about hotels at all. It would be about whether two people who'd learned to live behind walls could find the courage to step into the light together. The desert sun blazed through the terminal windows as they walked toward the waiting car, their shoulders almost touching, their shared purpose crackling with electricity neither could deny. Ready? Alexander asked as they approached the vehicle. Isabella looked at him, really looked, seeing past the billionaire armor to the man who trusted her with his deepest wound. Ready, she said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with marketing campaigns. The Peterson boardroom overlooked the Vegas Strip, but Isabella barely noticed the view. 12 executives sat around a marble table that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights like accusations, their faces ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Ms. Chen, Marcus Webb's voice carried none of yesterday's warmth. Before we begin, I need to address the elephant in the room. How do we know you didn't sell our strategy to Meridian Hotels? Isabella's throat went dry, but Alexander's voice cut through the tension before she could respond. Because I've spent the last 18 hours investigating every communication Ms. Chen has had since joining Sterling Industries. His tone was arctic, commanding. Phone records, emails, financial transactions, everything. She's clean. The board members exchanged glances. Isabella felt a flush of gratitude mixed with something that might have been betrayal. He'd investigated her. Completely. Thoroughly. Then how do you explain the similarities? Demanded Patricia Reeves, Peterson's head of marketing. Isabella found her voice. Because pain is universal. Because everyone who's ever lost something they loved understands the need to start over. Meridian stole the surface, but they missed the heart. She clicked to her first slide, not the polished imagery from before, but a raw photograph she'd taken herself. Her own apartment the night David left, boxes scattered across the floor, wedding dress still hanging in the closet. "This is what starting over actually looks like," she said, her voice steady despite the exposure. "Not elegant suitcases and soft lighting. Broken pieces and the courage to believe you can build something better from what's left." The boardroom fell silent. Alexander's eyes never left her face. "Meridian's campaign sells fantasy," Isabella continued. "We're selling truth. The difference is everything." For the next 40 minutes, she poured her heart into every slide, every story, every carefully chosen word. She talked about her grandmother's immigration story, about building dreams from scratch, about the hotel room she'd lived in for a week after David's betrayal while she figured out how to survive. When she finished, the silence stretched like held breath. "Extraordinary," Patricia Reeves said finally. "This is exactly what our brand represents. Authentic resilience. When can we launch?" Marcus Webb leaned forward, all traces of suspicion gone. 6 weeks, Isabella managed, her adrenaline finally beginning to ebb. "Perfect. Ms. Chen, Mr. Stone, excellent work." As the board filed out, Isabella remained frozen at the head of the table, the magnitude of what she'd just revealed crashing over her. She'd laid her entire soul bare in front of strangers, used her deepest wounds as marketing material. "You investigated me." Her voice was barely a whisper. Alexander was gathering papers with mechanical precision. "Standard procedure. You went through my phone records, my bank statements, my entire life. I had to be sure." Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Had to be sure of what? That I wasn't Richard? That I wasn't going to betray you like everyone else?" "Yes." The admission was brutal in its honesty. "And what did you find, Alexander? What secrets did you uncover when you turned my life inside out?" He stopped shuffling papers, his hands perfectly still. "I found a woman who paid her way through graduate school working 3 jobs. Who sent money to her mother every month even when she was barely surviving herself. Who lived in her car for 2 weeks rather than ask her ex-fiancé's family for help." Each revelation felt like being flayed alive. "You had no right." "I found someone who donated her entire savings to a women's shelter the month after her engagement ended. Who volunteers at a literacy center every Saturday morning, teaching immigrants to read." His voice was getting rougher, more raw. "I found someone who's never taken the easy road, never compromised her principles, never sold out anything that mattered." Stop. Tears were burning behind Isabella's eyes. "I found someone who writes poetry in hotel lobbies and keeps a picture of her grandmother in her wallet and calls her neighbor's elderly mother every Sunday because the woman has no family left." "Please stop." But Alexander was standing now, moving around the table toward her with something like desperation in his eyes. "I found someone who made me remember what it feels like to believe in something good." His voice cracked on the last word. "And it terrified me." The confession hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Isabella looked up at him, seeing the man who'd spent 7 years building walls so high he'd forgotten what lay beyond them. "Why did he leave?" Alexander asked quietly. "Your ex-fiancé, David." Isabella closed her eyes, the old wound throbbing. "His family had money. Old money. The kind that comes with expectations and social circles and rules about who belongs." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "I didn't fit. Scholarship student, Immigrant grandmother, no pedigree. His mother made it clear that loving me was a phase he'd grow out of. And he chose them. He chose safety. The words tasted like ashes. 2 weeks before the wedding, he sat in our kitchen and explained how love wasn't enough. How real life required practical decisions. How he couldn't risk his inheritance, his future, his family's approval for something as uncertain as what we had. Alexander's face had gone pale. Isabella. The worst part wasn't that he left. It was that he made it sound reasonable. Logical. Like choosing them over me was the mature, responsible thing to do. She wiped at her eyes angrily. So excuse me if I don't appreciate being investigated like a criminal because you can't tell the difference between betrayal and business. But instead of the anger she expected, Alexander's expression cracked open with something that looked like recognition. "My mother," he said quietly. "What?" "You asked what happened to me. My mother. She chose security over love too." His hands were shaking slightly. Richard didn't just steal business secrets. He seduced her. Convinced her that my father was a failure, that she deserved better. When Dad died and the company started struggling, she sided with Richard. Helped him strip everything away because he promised her a bigger house, better lifestyle. Isabella's anger dissolved into understanding. "Oh, Alexander." She looked me in the eye at my father's funeral and told me Richard was going to take care of everything. That I should be grateful for his guidance. His laugh was bitter. She married him 6 months later. Took half of what little was left and moved to Europe. When did you last speak to her? 7 years ago. She calls sometimes, when Richard's businesses hit rough patches. Wants to know if I might consider reconciliation. The word was poison in his mouth. Isabella stood slowly, the corporate table between them suddenly feeling like an ocean. "We're quite a pair," she said softly. "Both of us experts at being abandoned by people who were supposed to love us." "Isabella, I'm sorry. The investigation was necessary," she finished. "I understand. Trust is earned, not given." But as she gathered her materials and headed for the door, Alexander's voice stopped her. "For what it's worth," he said, echoing her words from days ago, "David was an idiot." She turned back, seeing something raw and honest in his face. "So was Richard," she replied. "And so was your mother." The words hung in the desert air between them, a recognition that some wounds could only be understood by those who carried similar scars. As they left the boardroom together, neither spoke about how their lives had just been laid bare, how the careful distance they'd maintained had crumbled into dust. But walking beside him through the hotel lobby, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe, just maybe, not everyone left. The flight back to New York was delayed 3 hours due to weather, stranding them in the Vegas airport like refugees from their own carefully constructed lives. Isabella found herself sitting beside Alexander in an empty gate area, the corporate armor they'd worn all day finally beginning to slip away. "I've never told anyone about David's family," she said suddenly, staring out at the planes grounded on the tarmac. "Not the real reason he left." Alexander looked up from his phone, where he'd been pretending to read emails for the past 20 minutes. "Why not?" "Because it sounds pathetic. Poor girl gets dumped because she's not good enough for rich boy's family. It's such a cliché. Heartbreak usually is." His voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Doesn't make it hurt less." Isabella pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly feeling smaller than her years. "The night he told me, I kept thinking there had to be a mistake. That if I could just explain myself better, prove my worth somehow, he'd remember that he loved me." "Did you try?" "For about 5 minutes. Then I realized he'd already made his choice weeks earlier. Maybe months. I was just the last to know. She rested her chin on her knees. Have you ever felt completely expendable? Like your entire existence could be erased and no one would notice. Alexander was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the airport announcements. Every day since my father died. The confession hung between them like a prayer offered to the void. Tell me about him, Isabella said softly. Your father. A ghost of a smile crossed Alexander's features. James Stone. Everyone called him Jimmy. He wore the same lucky tie to every important meeting, this awful green thing with yellow polka dots that my mother hated. Said it was unprofessional. But he wore it anyway. Every time. Said luck mattered more than fashion in business. Alexander's hands relaxed for the first time all day. He knew everyone's birthday in the company. All 63 employees. Their kids' names, their anniversaries. He'd send handwritten notes when people got promoted or had babies. Isabella could picture it, a man who led with heart instead of spreadsheets, who believed people mattered more than profit margins. He sounds wonderful. He was. And completely naive about human nature. Alexander's expression darkened. Richard used to joke that Dad was too trusting for his own good. Turns out he was planning the whole time, gaining Dad's confidence, learning our systems, positioning himself to take everything when the moment was right. Your father couldn't have known. Couldn't he? The question carried 7 years of guilt. There were signs. Late meetings I wasn't invited to. Clients who suddenly seemed distant. Dad just chose to believe the best about people, even when those people were actively destroying him. Isabella watched him carefully, seeing the weight he'd been carrying. You think his trust killed him? I know it did. The stress, the betrayal, watching everything he'd built crumble. His heart gave out 3 months after we lost the Kellerman contract. The doctors said it was a massive coronary, but I knew better. Richard broke his heart as literally as if he'd put a gun to his chest. The gate area felt suspended in time, 2 people finally speaking truths they'd carried alone for too long. Is that why you built all the rules? Isabella asked. The no-office romance policy, the background checks, the walls around everything? Those rules protect people. They protect you. Alexander looked at her sharply, but Isabella's expression held no judgment, only understanding. What's wrong with protecting myself? Nothing. Until protection becomes prison. She uncurled from her defensive position, turning to face him fully. Alexander, your father's trust didn't kill him. Richard's betrayal did. There's a difference. Is there? The result was the same. The result was that you survived. You rebuilt everything he lost and made it stronger. You became the man he raised you to be, just safer. Safer, Alexander repeated, as if testing the word. David's rejection didn't kill me either, Isabella continued. But for 2 years, I let it convince me that love was too expensive. That wanting someone meant giving them the power to destroy you. And now, the question hung between them, loaded with possibility and terrified hope. Now I think maybe the real tragedy isn't when someone breaks your heart, Isabella said slowly. It's when you let that broken heart convince you that you don't deserve to be loved. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a wall cracking, a defense finally beginning to crumble. The poetry, he said suddenly. What? In your background check. I found out you write poetry in hotel lobbies. Why hotels? Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's stupid. Tell me anyway. Because hotels are temporary. Anonymous. You can be anyone there, feel anything, write the most embarrassing truths about yourself, and no one knows who you are. She studied her hands. After David left, I couldn't bear to write in our apartment. Everything there reminded me of the life we'd planned. So I'd go to hotel lobbies and pretend I was someone else. Someone brave enough to put feelings into words. What do you write about? Hope, mostly. Which is ironic, considering I didn't have any. Can I hear something? The request was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that Isabella found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. It's not very good, she warned. I don't care. She closed her eyes, remembering the poem she'd written in the Marriott downtown the week she'd gotten the job at Sterling Industries. Here in this lobby of strangers and suitcases, I practice being someone new. Someone who believes in second chances, who trusts that broken things can heal, that hearts can learn to hope again without permission from the past. Tomorrow I will put on armor made of confidence and careful smiles, but tonight in this borrowed space, I remember what it felt like to believe in forever. When she opened her eyes, Alexander was staring at her with an expression that took her breath away. Isabella. Delayed Flight 447 to New York is now boarding at Gate C12. The announcement shattered the moment, returning them to a world of schedules and obligations. But as they gathered their belongings and walked toward the gate, something fundamental had shifted between them. Thank you, Alexander said as they joined the boarding line. For what? For reminding me what brave looks like. As they settled into their seats for the flight home, Isabella caught Alexander watching her with something that looked remarkably like wonder. For the first time in 7 years, his carefully constructed walls were showing cracks large enough to let light through. And for the first time in 2 years, Isabella found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking. The plane lifted off into the desert night, carrying them back toward a life that would never be quite the same again. The email arrived at 7:23 a.m. on Monday morning, 3 days after their return from Vegas. Isabella was still riding the high of their successful presentation, still replaying every moment of vulnerability they'd shared, when her computer chimed with a message that would shatter everything. From david.richardson@richardsonlegal.com. Subject: Urgent, need to talk. Bella, I know this is unexpected, but I'm in New York for work and I heard about your success with the Peterson campaign. I've made a terrible mistake. Can we meet? I have something important to tell you about us. About our future. Love always, David. Isabella stared at the screen, her coffee growing cold as 7 months of carefully built confidence crumbled to dust. David never called her Bella anymore. Hadn't used love always since their engagement ended. And he'd never, ever admitted to making mistakes. Her hands shook as she deleted the email without responding, but the damage was done. All morning, she found herself distracted, jumping at every sound, checking her phone compulsively. The careful equilibrium she'd built since Vegas felt as fragile as spun glass. She was reviewing campaign materials when her phone buzzed with a text. I'm downstairs in your lobby. Please, Bella. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Through her office window, she could see the Sterling Industries lobby 30 floors below. Somewhere down there, David was waiting with his perfect smile and expensive suit and whatever carefully crafted words he thought would win her back. Everything all right? Marcus appeared in her doorway, concern creasing his features. Fine, Isabella lied, minimizing her phone screen. Just reviewing the Peterson timeline. But she wasn't fine. She was spiraling, caught between the woman she'd been, the one who'd loved David enough to plan a life with him, and the one she was becoming, who'd found something real and terrifying with a man who looked at her like she was worth protecting. Her phone buzzed again. I left Sarah. I called off the engagement. I choose you, Bella. I've always chosen you. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah, the trust fund Princess David's mother, had introduced him to 6 months after their breakup. The woman who fit perfectly into his family's expectations, who could trace her lineage back to the Mayflower and had never worked a day in her life. Isabella's vision blurred. If David had left Sarah, if he'd finally found the courage to choose love over security. No, she couldn't think like this. Not after everything she'd learned about herself, about what she deserved. But doubt crept in anyway, whispering familiar refrains. What if this time is different? What if he means it? What if you throw away your second chance because you're too scared to trust again? Her computer chimed with an instant message from Alexander. Conference room 3. 10 minutes. Need to discuss Peterson timeline. The corporate tone felt like ice water after the warmth they'd shared in Vegas. But maybe that was better. Maybe she'd imagined the connection, read too much into shared wounds and whispered confessions. Maybe Alexander was exactly what he'd always been, her boss, nothing more. Alexander paced conference room 3 like a caged animal, his carefully maintained composure hanging by threads. He'd watched Isabella through his office window all morning, seen her distraction, her jumpiness, the way she kept checking her phone with an expression that looked disturbingly like hope. Something was wrong. Someone was wrong. When she knocked on the conference room door, he could see it immediately, the careful distance in her posture, the professional mask she'd worn during their first meeting. All the intimacy they'd built in Vegas had evaporated, replaced by walls he recognized because he'd built identical ones himself. You wanted to discuss the timeline? Her voice was perfectly modulated, emotionally neutral. What happened? I'm sorry. This morning you were relaxed, confident. Now you look like you're preparing for battle. What changed? Isabella's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nothing changed. I'm simply maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. The phrase hit him like a slap. Professional boundaries. Yes. As you've made clear from the beginning, Sterling Industries maintains strict separation between personal and professional matters. Alexander studied her face, seeing the careful construction of each word, the deliberate distance in her tone. Someone had gotten to her. Someone had reminded her of old wounds, old fears. Who contacted you? I beg your pardon? Someone reached out this morning. Someone from your past. Who was it? Isabella's composure cracked just enough to reveal the pain underneath. That's not your concern. Like hell it isn't. The profanity slipped out before he could stop it, raw and honest in a way that made Isabella flinch. Mr. Stone. Don't. He stepped closer, and she retreated until her back hit the conference room wall. Don't hide behind formalities. Not after Vegas. Not after everything we shared. Vegas was a mistake. The words were designed to wound, and they found their mark perfectly. Alexander felt 7 years of careful control threatening to snap. A mistake. A moment of professional vulnerability that I regret. Isabella's voice was getting stronger, more convinced of her own lies. I shared inappropriate personal information that has no place in our working relationship. And the poetry? The stories about your grandmother, your struggles, your dreams, that was all inappropriate personal information. Yes. And when I told you about my father, about Richard's betrayal, about my mother's abandonment, that was inappropriate too? Isabella's face went pale, but she held her ground. Yes. Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're good at this. Building walls, pushing people away before they can hurt you. Did David teach you that, or did you figure it out on your own? The mention of David's name made Isabella go rigid. Bingo. He contacted you, Alexander continued, his voice deadly quiet. Your ex-fiancé. The one who chose his family's money over your future. What did he want? That's none of your business. Isn't it? Because 3 days ago you were writing poetry about second chances and believing in forever, and now you're back to treating me like a stranger. You are a stranger, Isabella said, but her voice cracked on the words. We're employer and employee. Nothing more. So when you told me about David's betrayal, when you helped me remember what my father actually stood for, when you made me feel something real for the first time in 7 years, that was nothing? That was a mistake. Stop saying that. Alexander's control finally shattered. Stop hiding behind corporate speak and professional boundaries, and tell me the truth. What did he offer you? Isabella's composure finally broke completely. He left her. He called off his engagement to Sarah, and he wants me back. He said he's always chosen me, that leaving was a mistake, that he what? That he suddenly realized you were worth more than his trust fund? That love matters more than his mother's approval. Alexander's voice was brutal in its accuracy. How convenient. How perfectly timed. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you're scared. That letting yourself care about someone new feels impossible when the old wound is still bleeding. But I also understand that you're about to make the same mistake I've been making for 7 years. What mistake? Choosing safety over truth. Choosing the familiar pain over the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, you deserve better than someone who only wants you when it's convenient. Isabella's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. And what do you know about what I deserve? You've spent 3 weeks investigating me, pushing me away, building walls so high I can barely see over them. At least David is offering something real. Real. Alexander moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Real is what happened in Vegas. Real is poetry written in hotel lobbies and sharing the worst parts of yourself with someone who sees them and doesn't run. Real is not some convenient reconciliation when his backup plan falls through. You don't know that's what this is. Don't I? Alexander's smile was sharp enough to cut. Tell me, Isabella, when did he contact you? Before or after news of your Peterson success started making industry rounds? The question hit its mark. Isabella's face went white, confirming what Alexander had already suspected. Get out, she whispered. Isabella. Get out. Her voice cracked like breaking glass. You have no right to judge my choices. No right to analyze my relationships. And no right to act like you care when you've spent weeks treating me like a potential threat. Alexander stood frozen for a moment, seeing the woman he'd begun to care for disappearing behind walls that looked exactly like his own. You're right, he said finally. I have no right to any of it. He walked to the door, then paused without turning around. But for what it's worth, I've never seen you as a threat. You're the first person in 7 years who made me remember what it felt like to hope. The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Isabella alone with her shattered defenses and the terrible knowledge that she'd just destroyed the best thing that had happened to her since David left. But David was downstairs, waiting with promises and apologies and the familiar comfort of a love that had once felt like everything, even if it had also felt like nothing at all. Isabella sat in the hotel bar where she'd agreed to meet David, her untouched martini growing warm as she watched him explain away 2 years of absence with the same charm that had once made her believe in forever. Realized I was living someone else's life, David was saying, his perfectly manicured hands gesturing as he spoke. Mother's expectations, the family legacy, all of it. But none of it mattered without you, Bella. He looked exactly the same, sandy hair perfectly styled, blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled, the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Sitting across from him in his expensive suit, Isabella felt like she was looking at a photograph of her former life. "You called off your engagement to Sarah," she said, testing the words. "The moment I realized she could never be you. We were planning the wedding, and all I could think about was how wrong it felt. How empty." David reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I kept comparing everything to what we had. The way you laughed at my terrible jokes, how you'd steal my sweaters and make them look better than they ever did on me." Isabella stared down at their joined hands, remembering how this touch used to set her world on fire. Now it just felt familiar, safe, predictable. "Your mother will never accept me," she said quietly. "Mother's opinion doesn't matter anymore. I've made my choice." David's thumb traced circles on her knuckles. "I have my own money now, the inheritance from grandfather's trust. We could have the life we planned, Bella. Travel, that little house in Connecticut you loved, maybe start a family." The future he painted was exactly what she dreamed of 2 years ago. Security, belonging, the white picket fence life that had seemed impossible after her father left and her mother struggled to keep them afloat. "I've changed, David," she said, though she wasn't sure if it was a warning or an explanation. "I know. I can see it. You're more confident, more successful. The Peterson campaign was brilliant. I heard about it through industry connections. You've become everything I always knew you could be." Industry connections. Alexander's words echoed in her mind. "When did he contact you? Before or after news of your Peterson success started making industry rounds?" She pushed the thought away. David was here, offering everything she'd once wanted. Everything safe and familiar and guaranteed. Unlike Alexander Stone, who offered nothing but complications and corporate rules and the terrifying possibility of losing herself all over again. "I need time to think," Isabella said finally. David's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Of course. This is a lot to process. But Bella," he squeezed her hand, "don't overthink this. Some things are worth fighting for, even if it takes time to find the courage." 20 floors above, Alexander stood at his office window, watching the city lights blur together like tears he refused to shed. His phone had been silent for hours. No calls, no texts, no sign that Isabella was anything other than exactly where she wanted to be. With a man who'd broken her heart and was apparently ready to offer her everything Alexander couldn't. "Sir." Jennifer appeared in his doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "The Yamamoto contract needs your signature, and legal wants to discuss the Morrison Clause revisions. Later." "Sir, it's almost 9 p.m. Perhaps you should go home, Jennifer." Alexander's voice was rough with exhaustion. "I'll handle the contracts tomorrow." But as his assistant's footsteps faded down the hallway, Alexander remained frozen at the window, replaying every moment of their fight. The way Isabella's face had shuttered when he'd mentioned David. The careful distance in her voice when she'd called their connection a mistake. Maybe she was right. Maybe Vegas had been nothing more than two wounded people finding temporary comfort in shared pain. Maybe what he'd interpreted as love was just recognition, two broken souls acknowledging their mutual damage. His phone buzzed. For a moment, his heart leaped, hoping. Text from Mother. "Darling, Richard and I are in New York next week. Perhaps we could have dinner? Time heals all wounds, you know." Alexander stared at the message, remembering Isabella's words about choosing safety over truth. About protection becoming prison. His mother wanted forgiveness without accountability. David wanted Isabella back without having earned her trust. Both offered the comfort of familiar patterns, old wounds that had been carefully tended until they felt like identity. But what if healing meant something different? What if it meant choosing the terrifying unknown over the predictable known? Alexander deleted his mother's message without responding and walked back to his desk, where Isabella's personnel file still lay open. Her emergency contact information, her references, her carefully crafted resume that told the story of someone who'd built everything from nothing. Underneath the corporate documents was the handwritten note she'd left him after their first meeting. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't let you down." She hadn't let him down. He'd let himself down by pushing her away the moment she'd gotten close enough to matter. But maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still time to choose courage over safety, truth over protection. Alexander picked up his phone and started typing. Isabella's apartment felt like a museum of her former life. Wedding magazines still stacked on the coffee table, engagement photos relegated to a drawer but never quite thrown away. She sat on her couch in the same spot where David had ended their engagement, reading Alexander's text for the 100th time. "I was wrong. About everything. You don't owe me anything, but if you're willing to listen, meet me tomorrow. 7 a.m. The lobby where you write poetry. I have something to tell you." Her finger hovered over the reply button, torn between curiosity and self-preservation. David's proposal sat like a safety net beneath her feet, comfortable, familiar, guaranteed to catch her if she fell. But Alexander's message felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, wind whipping around her, no certainty except the choice to jump or step back. Her phone rang, David's name flashing on the screen. "Have you thought about my offer?" His voice was warm, confident, assuming her answer before she'd given it. "I'm still thinking." "Bella, what's to think about? We love each other. We always have. Everything else is just noise." Everything else. Like the person she'd become in 2 years of building herself from scratch. Like the poetry she wrote in hotel lobbies. The confidence she'd earned through surviving alone. The dreams she'd built that had nothing to do with Connecticut houses or family expectations. Like the way Alexander had looked at her when she'd shared her grandmother's story, seeing her completely and never asking her to be smaller. "David," she said slowly, "when you think about our future, what do you see?" "Everything we planned before. The house, the kids, maybe that trip to Tuscany we talked about." "Why?" "And my career? My work." A pause. "Well, you wouldn't need to work once we're married. Not with my inheritance. You could pursue hobbies, maybe volunteer work." Isabella closed her eyes, hearing the future David offered, comfortable, safe, and completely devoid of the woman she'd fought to become. "I have to go," she said quietly. "Bella, wait." But she'd already hung up, staring at Alexander's message with new clarity. Some choices were about safety. Others were about truth. And for the first time in 2 years, Isabella knew which one she was brave enough to make. She typed her reply with steady fingers. "I'll be there." Then she deleted every other message in her phone, including David's, and went to bed with the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that tomorrow would change everything. Some risks, she was finally learning, were worth taking. Even when, especially when, you had no idea how they'd end. The Marriott lobby at 7 a.m. was exactly as Isabella remembered. Marble floors that echoed with the click of business heels, leather chairs arranged around coffee tables scattered with yesterday's newspapers, the soft hum of people beginning their days. She'd written 17 poems in this space over the past 2 years, each one a prayer to a future she couldn't quite envision. Alexander was already there, sitting in the corner chair where she usually wrote, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the perfectly pressed suit, replaced by jeans and a navy sweater that made him look younger, more human. More like the man who'd shared his deepest wounds in a Vegas airport rather than the billionaire who ruled from behind mahogany desks. "You came," he said as she approached, relief evident in his voice. "You asked me to." Isabella sat across from him, maintaining careful distance even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "What did you want to tell me?" For a moment, Alexander seemed to struggle with words. A man who commanded boardrooms reduced to silence by the proximity of one woman who'd seen through all his defenses. "I talked to my mother yesterday," he said finally. "She texted, wanting to have dinner, wanting to pretend the last 7 years never happened." Isabella waited, sensing this was important but not understanding why. "I've been carrying her betrayal like armor," Alexander continued, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Using it to justify every wall I built, every rule I created, every person I pushed away before they could hurt me. Including you, Alexander." "I deleted her message," he said, meeting her eyes for the first time, without responding. "Because you were right, protection had become prison. And I was so busy protecting myself from being hurt again that I hurt the one person who'd never given me reason to doubt her." Isabella felt tears threatening, but she held them back. "David offered me everything I thought I wanted. Security, commitment, the life we'd planned before." Alexander's face went pale, but he nodded. "And you deserve all of that. You deserve someone who chooses you first, always, without hesitation." "He wants the old version of me," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. "The woman who apologized for taking up space, who made herself smaller to fit into his family's expectations. He doesn't see who I've become, doesn't want to see her." Understanding flickered in Alexander's eyes. "But you do see her," Isabella said softly. "You've seen her from the beginning. The woman who writes poetry in hotel lobbies and builds campaigns from broken hearts and believes in second chances even when hope feels dangerous." "Isabella." "I chose you," she said, the words falling between them like a bridge across the chasm they'd created. "Yesterday, when everything was falling apart and I was terrified and lashing out, I still chose you, even when I was too scared to admit it." Alexander leaned forward, his composure finally cracking completely. "You chose me." "I chose the man who investigated my entire life to protect his company, but apologized when he realized it hurt me. I chose the one who shared his deepest pain in an airport and listened to my terrible poetry without judgment. I chose the person who sees my strength instead of trying to diminish it." "I don't have guarantees to offer you," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know how to do this, how to love someone without armor, how to trust without suspicion. I've spent 7 years building walls, and I'm terrified that I'll hurt you while I'm learning to tear them down." Isabella stood slowly, closing the distance between them until she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, the vulnerability he'd kept hidden for so long. "Then we'll learn together," she said simply. "We'll make mistakes and figure it out as we go. We'll write new rules that actually make sense for who we are now, not who we were when the world broke us." Alexander reached for her hands, his touch warm and certain despite his words. "Are you sure? Because once I let myself love you completely, I won't be able to let you go. And that terrifies me more than any corporate takeover or business failure ever could." Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in days. "Alexander Stone, are you telling me that falling in love is scarier than rebuilding a billion-dollar empire from scratch?" "Infinitely scarier," he admitted, standing to meet her gaze. "Because empires can be rebuilt. Hearts are irreplaceable." "Then it's a good thing mine comes with a lifetime warranty," Isabella said, rising on her tiptoes to brush her lips against his. "No returns, no exchanges, no expiration date." The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like two people learning a new language. Then Alexander's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Isabella melted into the warmth of someone who finally saw her completely and chose to stay. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "What happens now?" he asked. "The no-office romance policy is still technically in effect." Isabella laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "I think the CEO might be willing to make an exception. For the right person. Under the right circumstances. Only if his head of creative development agrees to the revised terms," Alexander replied, his smile transforming his entire face. "Something about new rules that make sense for who we are now. I think that can be arranged." Isabella traced her fingers along his jaw, marveling at the softness she found there. "Although I should warn you, I'm going to keep writing poetry in hotel lobbies. It's become a habit. Can I read them sometime? Only if you promise not to use them in marketing campaigns." "Deal." Alexander pulled her closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Isabella." "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing past the armor. For choosing courage over safety. For reminding me that some rules are worth breaking." Isabella kissed him again, deeper this time, with the confidence of someone who'd finally found where she belonged. Around them, the hotel lobby continued its morning rhythm. Business travelers checking out, coffee brewing, the world spinning forward with its endless capacity for new beginnings. "Alexander," she murmured against his lips. "MMM. I love you too." The words settled between them like promises made and kept, like prayers answered in ways they'd never dared to hope for. 6 months later, Isabella would write her final hotel lobby poem, this one in the Ritz-Carlton in Paris where Alexander had taken her for their first real vacation. It would be about love that felt like coming home and safety that didn't require walls, about two people who'd learned that the best rules were the ones written by hearts brave enough to trust again. But for now, in the marble lobby where she'd learned to hope, Isabella Chen and Alexander Stone held each other like people who'd finally found what they'd been searching for all along. Someone worth breaking all the rules for. Someone worth building new ones with. Someone worth choosing again and again, for all the beautiful, terrifying, magnificent days to come.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed the story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.